Whoa, hello. This will be your 1 minute warning. Well, actually, your less than 1 minute warning because now it's 10:30. So, come on in. A few seconds before we dive in here today. I want to welcome everyone. We began a number of weeks ago a study through the book of Job, and this is the first time in the study that I've had the opportunity to teach, and so very thankful for the ministry of Pastor Tom and Pastor Bob that they've been able to step in and help us work through this book. We're going to be in Job chapter 5 today. We're continuing to look at Eliphaz as he is now speaking to Job. And before we really start to unpack this text and dive into it today, let's take a moment to pray, and then we'll share a little bit. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for its power, for its relevance. Lord, there is so much in this testimony of Job and his life. Lord, and his friends, our so-called friends, and how they've responded to this tragedy in his life. There is so much for us to learn and to unpack. We really live in a world that does experience a lot of brokenness and hurt. Many of us have walked through seasons of grief. Many of us here today know of loss and of pain. On some levels, while we may not be able to fully understand what Job was experiencing, many of us can relate in some ways. And sometimes there are words and things spoken to us in these seasons that can be helpful to us. And other times there are words and things spoken to us in these seasons that maybe are meant to be helpful but aren't so much. And we see that in the testimony of Job's friends. And we pray that as we unpack these words today, that you would just guide us and direct us to be able to walk with people in times of grief in a way that would be honoring to you and that would be for their good. And that we would just be a presence of peace and comfort and love and support to those who are grieving. In Jesus' name, amen. I may have shared this before, but I think it bears worth sharing again in the context of the passage that we're studying and what we're going through in the book of Job. When Sheila and I began the process of international adoption, we started all the way back in 2013. And it was a process that was very, very invasive. If you don't know much about international adoption, almost it feels like every level of the government has to get involved very intimately in your life. And your home all of a sudden becomes a place where strangers are coming in and out of, and they're getting into your life and finding out about you. And we had to go be fingerprinted with the National Department of Homeland Security, like how many times, and multiple times up there, and just have all these different networks happening. And during that season, it was a 6-7 year season before the first two boys come home, you're supposed to spend like all of this time and all of these hours in preparing for how to receive children into your family who have had difficult and traumatic backgrounds and experiences. And so you learn a lot. You spend a lot of time in what they call like attachment training, where you learn how to attach with new children in your family and bond with them. You spend a lot of time in learning how to be with and parent children who have come from traumatic backgrounds and experiences, knowing that a lot of children every child in international adoption is coming with a traumatic past or a traumatic background, because every child in international adoption has lost their first family which is an incredibly traumatic thing, and one that just we can't even begin to imagine or unpack on a lot of levels. And so we spent all of this time focused on the boys. We spent all this time focused on them and focused on them adapting to the culture and the community that they were coming into in our families. Every family is its own culture. Very few families share culture. We all operate in our homes differently and relate to one another differently in our homes. And what we failed to do for ourselves, and what we failed to do really for the children who were already a part of our family, is we failed to understand how the adoption would affect them. And the kind of trauma and brokenness that it would bring not only to them, but to us as well. As you know, you have a mom and dad, and you have your biological children in your home, and one of the things that you build in that is you build this really comfortable and very well ordered, not to make a joke of this morning, even though they are nuts, you build this very well ordered nuclear structure, nuclear home that fits together really well, because you have the advantage from birth of knowing how to relate to one another, knowing how to care for one another, how to meet the needs of one another, and to connect with one another in a way that's very meaningful. And we can walk with people, with our own children that were biological when they went through difficult seasons and good seasons. All of a sudden then, one of the things that we realized very early on when Yuri and Levinsky came home, what happened to this was this. And that was with Yuri and Levinsky. And then when Stanley and Schneider came home, what happened to this was this. And so as you can see in that illustration, there is some stretching, even some brokenness that took place in learning how to process what life was going to be like now. And very early for Sheila and I, we realized that one of the things that we lost, now we gained so much, and at another time I can talk to you about all that we've gained in international adoption. But one of the things that we lost that was one of the biggest pieces of heartache for us was we lost Chris, Sheila, Bright, and Bailey Brody. That was gone in an instant, almost overnight. And that was really hard. And we realized within those first few weeks that we were never going to have that again. That was never going to be a reality in our family again. And so even in this great gain, and that's why in some ways it was a microcosm of life, because even in this great gain where God was adding to our family children from another country, we were recognizing at the same time our own loss. And we were dealing with something we never imagined we'd deal with in international adoption in our own hearts. Grief. And there were tears. There were difficult nights. I'm sure Sheila wouldn't mind me sharing. She's here today. There were a lot of nights where there were tears. Crying ourselves to sleep. Disappointment, disrupted times I'd hear her crying in the shower in the morning. That was a loss. And that was really, really hard. And when loss comes into our life, as we're seeing with Job and his testimony here, with loss in his life, one of the things that we naturally try to do as humans is we really try to work hard to order and make sense of that loss. We are desperate to make sense of it. We want to know why it happened. We want to know the purpose of it. We want to know how we might be able to grow from it. And all of these things that maybe are good, but maybe often are not. And as I was looking at the book of Job and doing some pre-study before we started it, I was reading a number of different scholars, and one of the guys I was listening to that had taught through the book, he said something one day that struck me, and I think I even shared it with Pastor Tom. I don't think I got to share it with Pastor Bob yet, but he said in his sermon, he said, "We are a nation of Job's friends." That's what he said. And I thought, whoa. And this is what Job's friends, this is what they do. Job's friends come into his life in this season of grief and this season of brokenness and hurt and heartache and trauma. And in their minds, their goal is to help him make sense of all this and order it and figure it out. I read a book last week. The title of the book was "Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved." That was the title of the book. And the author actually wrote a second book, and the title is There's No Cure for Being Human and Other Truths I've Needed to Hear. And I'm reading that second book right now. They actually go hand in hand. And she's actually a professor at Duke Divinity School, and she's in her late 30s, early 40s, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Newly married, young mother with their first child just being born. Her whole life set before her as a professor at Duke University, and all of a sudden, stage 4 colon cancer disrupts all of it. And she's a Christian, she's a believer, and she's walking through the heartache of that. And she's walking through the reality that in the moment that happened, as a staff member at Duke Divinity School, someone who's training pastors and theologians to go into ministry, where do you think all of her advice and wisdom was coming from? Job's friends. Let's make sense of this. Let's try to figure this out. Let's try to put this all together and make it work for you theologically. And part of what I loved about Hud and his ministry last week is Hud lives in this world as well. You can sit and you can talk to Hud for an hour, and thankfully Dan and I had the opportunity to have breakfast with him Monday morning. It was really, really wonderful, very eye-opening, but you heard him all on Sunday. He lives in this place, and he's experienced this. And his book, Discipline of Disturbance, was right in line with this very reality and fits very well together with some of the things we're going to explore as we go through this book as well. So Job chapter 5, I titled this, Don't Blame Fate. Don't Blame Fate. And this is Eliphaz, and what he's trying to do in his speech to Job is he's trying to, in his mind, help Job order this by seeing, you must have done something wrong to have this come upon you. This, bad things don't happen to good people like this. You know, you're not innocent. The innocent prosper. The Lord orders things for them. Somehow your life's been disoriented. What have you done? What is going on? And he starts by, in chapter 5, he's starting by reminding Job how helpful, right? Here Job is in the midst of loss, incredible, indescribable loss and heartache and death and destruction. And Eliphaz, in the first 7 verses here, is trying to remind him, hey, trouble is inevitable. Look, it's going to happen, right? And we know that. I'm not sure how helpful it was for Job in that moment when everything that he knew was falling apart. So let's look at the first 7 verses of chapter 5. This is Eliphaz speaking to Job. Call now. Is there anyone who will answer you? To which of the holy ones will you turn? Surely vexation kills the fool, and jealousy slays the simple. I have seen the fool taking root, but suddenly I cursed his dwelling. His children are far from safety. They are crushed in the gate, and there is no one to deliver them. The hungry eat his harvest, and he takes it out of his thorns, and the thirsty pant after his wealth. For affliction does not come from the dust, nor does trouble sprout from the ground. But a man is born to what? What does it say? A man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. And is there some truth to what Eliphaz is saying? Sure. This is the reality that makes Job's friends a very interesting case study. There are some truths to the words that they're saying, but we can say things that are truthful and not always helpful in the moment. I mean, in one part, he's echoing some of the same sentiments as Jesus, right? John chapter 16. I've said these things to you, that you may have peace. In the world you will have what? Trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And so here is Job's friend, Eliphaz. He's come to him in this time of grief and trauma and turmoil. And he says, hey, look, buddy, you're not innocent. None of us are innocent. And hey, if you live in this world, you know, you walk through the fire, guess what? You're going to get burned. You've heard that one before? Trouble's going to happen. It's going to come upon you. Why is this not exactly helpful in this moment. What's missing? What? Yeah, well, yeah, we could all at once. Yeah. Compassion just, yeah. Yeah, Bob. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the beauty of this book, by the way. Its narrative quality is absolutely splendid. You can read Job, take the chapters and verses out of it. You can do that now on the computer. You can go to a program and take all the chapter numbers and verse numbers out because they were added later, and you can read it like a book, and it reads. You can't put it down. It's beautiful, and it's walking us towards that divine perspective. Here are all the perspectives that don't measure up. Here are all the perspectives that people are going to give us in grief that don't quite make sense. But there is one, it's coming. It's towards the end of the book, and this one will make sense of it all. So yeah, compassion is missing. A divine perspective is missing. What else? Anything else? Yeah, Ken. Yeah. I mean, the level of loss we can't even begin to unpack in our minds that Job has endured. No sense of encouragement. Absolutely. Yeah, what else? Bob? Yeah, we don't know what God is thinking. And we're going to be reminded of that, right? We sometimes, and in our best laid plans. You know, pastoral visitation, lay visitation, all visitation, really finds ourselves in situations where we're providing this kind of care to people. And our elders, in the month of October, every month we pick out a topic, and we take 20 to 25 minutes in the elder meeting, and we just sharpen one another on that topic. And a different elder leads the discussion, and we have a time of just discussion and dialogue over it. And our topic for the month of October was grief care. Very fitting. I didn't realize we were going to have HUD here and all those things when I picked that out long ago. But Dan actually led our discussion last Thursday in grief care. And we come alongside of people with really good intentions a lot of times in lay visitation and pastoral visitation to care for them when they're grieving. And I think it's important that we're careful not to harm in those situations, to really be gentle and to really consider kindly what is needed. And sometimes, and this is what's hard for those of us in the room that are doers. We have some doers in here, I'm sure, people that like to just get things done and do it. Sometimes in our doing, we forget that just being present, being willing to be there in a moment of sheer trauma and grief is a huge, huge source of comfort. The Spirit can work through us without speaking. Yes? Yeah. How many of us have experienced that? The Spirit working through somebody where they didn't need to say a word. Yeah. I have absolutely experienced that in my life. Somebody just being present in a moment without having to say anything. And it's very, very comforting. You know, when my uncle died very unexpectedly. I went into the hospital for a day procedure. This is many years ago now, over almost 15 years ago now. Brighton wasn't born yet. He was going to be born soon. Over 15 years ago then. Brighton turns 15 tomorrow. And I drove him in. I drove him into the hospital. I said, I'll pick you up in a few days. The day procedure. Okay. He got MRSA. Never came home. Died. In the hospital. MRSA. So my dad's little brother, he was like an older brother to me more than an uncle growing up. It was very hard. Very traumatic. And I remember the most comforting presence in my life in that season was my wife. And not because she had all kinds of incredible, wonderful things to say to me. She'd been through her own trauma and her own grief. She just sat with me. I remember one night I came home and I cried. It was really emotional. And we just sat on the couch together. I don't even think she said anything. But that was so comforting and brought so much peace. Sometimes we don't have to say anything. Job's friends don't really understand that. They have a lot of things to say. They have to try to fix this, to try to make sense of it all. And they're going to try to do this in what I kind of identified as 3 steps here. So let's look at verses 8 to 16, the first step. Eliphaz, as for me, there it is, Bob, right? As for me, I would seek God, and to God I would commit my cause. Who does great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number. He gives rain on the earth and sends waters on the fields. He sets on high those who are lowly, and those who mourn are lifted to safety. He frustrates the devices of the crafty so that their hands achieves no success. He catches the wise in their own craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are brought to a quick end. They meet with darkness in the daytime and grope at noonday as in night. But he saves the needy from the sword of their mouth and from the hand of the mighty. So the poor have hope, and injustice shuts her mouth. So how Eliphaz essentially is saying, look, throw yourselves on the mercies of God. If I were you in this situation, as if he could possibly understand, I'd throw myself on the mercies of God. That's what I would do. How does Eliphaz understand God in tribulation, based off of what we see in those verses? How does Eliphaz understand God in tribulation? What does he say God would do? Not all of these things are wrong, by the way. Some of these things are very true. Some of these things are true, but not always all the time true. Yeah, Dave. Yeah, he certainly sees him as someone who's judging all of this, yeah. Of course, element of God's character, God is a righteous judge. No doubt about that, yeah. What else? How else does he see God in the tribulation here? Yeah. Somewhere along the line, you'll get an explanation to all of this. Yeah. Yep. How else? How does Eliphaz understand God in tribulations? Good and bad. What does God do with the people who are set high? He brings them low, right? I guess Eliphaz didn't see himself as one of those that were set high. What does he do with those who mourn? He lifts them to safety. God does that, right? Verse 16, what does he give? The poor have what? Yeah, God does these things, certainly. He certainly does. Does he always frustrate the devices of the crafty? Does God always do that? Did he frustrate the devices of Nebuchadnezzar? He doesn't always frustrate the devices of the crafty. Anything else? How does Eliphaz understand God in tribulations? He's a judge. He'll give an answer at some point. You'll get it. Look, he'll give you hope. Right? Well, if you're not going to throw yourselves on the mercies of God, Job, then maybe you could just look at all of this and consider that it's just all part of God's discipline. God's disciplining you. Remember, you're not innocent, chapter 4. We're not innocent. This is God's discipline. All of this loss in your life that you've experienced, this unfathomable loss. And let's remember, this is very different. This is very different because Job lost everything. It's his spouse that's left. That's it. Very different than some of the loss that we experience. Let's look at verses 17 to 26. Eliphaz is saying, consider this as God's discipline. So let's see, how does God's discipline work? according to Eliphaz. Verse 17, behold, blessed is the one who God reproves. He's reproving you, Job. Therefore, despise not the discipline of the Almighty. Don't be angry. For he wounds, but he binds up. He shatters, but his hands heal. He will deliver you from 6 troubles. In 7, no evil shall touch you. In famine, he will redeem. Boy, that verse 19 just hit me, is the insensitivity of that. In famine, he will redeem you from death, and in war from the power of the sword. You shall be hidden from the lash of the tongue, and shall not fear destruction when it comes. At destruction and famine you shall laugh, and shall not fear the beasts of the earth, for you shall be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field shall be at peace with you. You shall know that your tent is at peace. You shall inspect your fold and miss nothing. Why can't you make order of this, Job? You shall know also that your offspring shall be many, and your descendants as the grass of the earth. You shall come to your grave in ripe old age, like a sheaf gathered up in its season. Ooh, there's some darts in that one. Saying to a man who lost all of his children, you shall also know that your offspring shall be many. In that moment. Saying to a man whose wife was telling him to curse God and die, you shall be hidden from the lash of the tongue. How does God's discipline work according to Eliphaz? His punishment. He will, yeah. So there's a caveat. Again, it's very interesting. When you look at the words of Job's friends, you find not everything that they're saying is not true. There are some things that they're saying that are true, but there are also things that they're saying that are incredibly unhelpful, not wise. They're things that God is going to correct later on in the book when we get there. As I was reading this passage, I was thinking, there are some seasons we walk through in life where, and I've been in these places and you've been in these places, I'm sure, where I can't make sense of anything. And when I'm in those places, I fall back into this place where you are God in heaven. I am here on earth. I'm going to let my words be what? Few. He is God in heaven. I am here on earth. What are these friends doing? They're multiplying their words. Discipline is punishment. Yes, it can also heal. Yeah. What else do you see? What about when he says, no evil shall touch you? Who was doing this? Who had God given permission to? What does Eliphaz know about the trauma and the grief that Job was in? There's that, Pastor Bob, there's that divine perspective again, right? Missing the divine perspective. He had no idea about the heavenly conversation that happened that allowed Job to find himself in this situation. God is God. He's on his throne. Still in Job's life. What else? What about verse 22? How close do you think Job was to being able to do that? Laugh? Eliphaz speaking as a man who I wonder if he ever endured an ounce of loss in his life. Maybe he did. I don't know. I don't want to be too critical of him. But they are put here as an example for us, so we should learn from them. There's going to be more friends, by the way, that come. Job has a few friends that are going to speak. And next week, Job's going to try to respond. He's going to try to justify himself in all of this. Look how it ends. Step 1, throw yourself on the mercies of God. Step 2, look at it all as part of God's discipline. This is all just part of God's. Look, one day you're going to look back and laugh at all this, Job. Step 3, accept what I'm saying as true and good for you. Verse 27, one verse. Behold, this we have searched out, me and my other friends that are here to talk to you. Now, we've sat here quietly for a few days and let you sit there and stir in your sadness, but we've searched this out. It's true. Hear and know it's for your good. Yeah, Dave. That's true. Yeah, it is. Boy, that's a good word, Dave. You're right. It is. It's earthly wisdom. Yeah. And remember, this is a very early book. It's placed in the middle of the Old Testament, but we believe it to be one of the earlier books that was written in the Bible. So yeah, there was very little written word available to these people. I was struck a few weeks ago because I had to teach the 4th and 5th graders downstairs. And boy, that's a fun practice every once in a while. Every once in a while, everybody should have to teach 4th and 5th grade boys. It's just talk about order, disrupting order. The lesson was on Babel. And we have some super intuitive 4th and 5th grade boys down there. And I will tell you, one of those boys was able to see how we do this, how we order these things, and how we try to build towers for ourselves on social media. I said, what are some of the areas that you see Babel happening in our culture and our world today? And one of the boys said, Instagram. Out of the mouths of babes, right? Woo! Yeah, I was like, man. But the thought occurred to me that we can do this with our grief too, and with our counsel. If we're not grounded in a healthy perspective, in a divine perspective, if we're relying on earthly wisdom, we can build up towers in our minds to help us get through something in life that's very difficult, only to be shattered when somebody comes along and pushes a block out and it all falls apart because it's rested on something, some concept, some component that's less than biblical, less than divine in its perspective. And I've known people that have walked through seasons of grief and built a Babel for themselves to protect themselves in that grief, only to later in life have something happen and they completely walk away from God. Something comes and pushes that block out and they have nothing left to hold on to. What I've come to learn, it's hard to believe when I look back, it's coming up on almost 20 years of pastoral ministry, and that's shocking to me. 2024 will be 20 years of pastoral ministry, full time. And what I have come to learn when I'm in these situations and environments with people where I'm caring for them in grief and trauma, and I've found myself in some really sudden and difficult places, is that no one person suffers and grieves the same. And so for me to walk into an environment with this posture of Job's friends and to believe if I was in your situation, here's what I'd do. Here's what I would do. It's incredibly, incredibly harmful. And rather, it's so much better for me to just sit. I got to do that this week with a widow, a newly widowed woman in our congregation. And you know, she came in and I didn't have a lot of colloquialisms. I didn't have a lot of self-help tips for her. In fact, I had none. You know what I had? I had her husband's obituary. I said to her, let's talk about him. How you been doing? How have you been processing this? How have you been unpacking it? How has Jesus made himself known to you in this season? Where have you seen him comfort? Give hope. I'm going to let her share. Step back, pray, share a scripture. I'm not going to endeavor to pretend like I know how she feels, what she's going through, the loss. But I want to be present for her. I want to be present for all of you, and I know that all of us desire to care for people well in seasons of grief and seasons of loss. And perhaps one of the greatest things that we learn from Job's friends is how not to. How not to. How to show up and seem like we have it all put together and figured out. And why can't you pick up the pieces and figure it out? Go ahead, Ken. Mm-hmm. And yeah. And it can be so well intentioned too, because it really genuinely could have helped us. You know, like the thing that we're sharing could have been something that really, in that season of our life, when we walked through that, boy, that was helpful to me. Let me give it to you. But it doesn't always work that way in grief. And sometimes we have to discern the right time, the right space, if at all, to present those things. But yeah, it is our natural tendency to just want to help, to want to say the right thing. And somebody said to me one time in the context of pastoral care, being the right person and being postured as the right kind of person in that season is so much more important than saying the right thing. And so it goes back to our heart posture and how we approach people in their loss and in their grief and where we're at and how we come to the table. And so hopefully as we continue to work through this book and we continue to study Job's friends, we'll learn some strategies that we may not use. The benefit of Job's book, the beauty of it, is that we get to see Job's response right away to his friends as they share with him. How did it make Job feel, that advice, that wisdom? How does he respond to it? That's where we go next week, begin to unpack that. Yeah, Bob. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yep. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Man, yeah, that's such good wisdom because, yeah, and that is definitely a challenge. It's a challenge as a young guy coming into ministry. You see the world through rose-colored lenses. And young pastors, and I made this mistake early in ministry, often, Bob's exactly right. You want to sit with somebody and you want to rush them through that grief because it doesn't feel good to you, because you're uncomfortable, because you haven't experienced it before. And my goodness, it's such a discipline to learn how to sit with somebody and grieve with them and not rush them through it. And know that, yeah, it will be all right. They will get through it, but they may not ever get over it. The waves of grief come in different seasons of life and in different times throughout the years. Yeah, Bob. He did know what was true. That's right. Yep. He never cursed God, did he? Yeah, he never cursed God. Yeah, and God's going to answer him at the end. And it's very beautiful what God does, how God cares for Job.
Don't you think even social media many times creates a problem in this regard?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, I'm thinking of, I'll just give a personal thing. It happened this week. My parents died, around the same season,
Mm.
the same year. My mom died a week before Thanksgiving. My dad died the day after Christmas.
Mm.
And so when it comes to this season of Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's not necessarily the best joyous time in my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read a Facebook statement and said, I just praise God that this is the anniversary of my loved one's death. And, this is their 5th year in heaven. And I'm thinking, I don't always feel that way.
Mm.
I don't always feel like I want to rejoice. I know where my parents are. They're with the Lord. But I miss them because they're not here.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I'm not going to write a Facebook post, and the other day I felt real guilty because I read one of those things and I'm saying, I don't remember the year my dad died.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not celebrating the anniversary. So I must not be a good person. And
Right.
I know that sounds
Yeah,
ridiculous,
right.
but that says that there's still a sense of grief
Mm-hmm.
in my life because
Mm-hmm.
grief is loss.
Mm-hmm.
And loss looks different for different people. But I think the social media really enhances
Mm.
us feeling guilt and grief
Mm-hmm.
together.
Yeah.
And that's probably not a healthy thing.
No. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And sometimes it brings things up that we're just not quite, they're too painful, and we're not quite ready to go through that again for people that have experienced near loss. So, yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, this Saturday, we're going to talk a little bit more about grief if you want to come and learn. If you didn't register, if this interests you, I think it's such a great way to know how to care for people in our lives who are grieving, to learn how to journey alongside of them. It's very intriguing that we're going through this book in this season, that we have the seminar coming. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to Tim and being here and being present and learning from him. He's very well learned in this particular area. So, yeah. Thank you much.